Right, I'm talking about a coastal site in southeastern Scotland on the southern shore of the Firth of Forth, the major southern Scottish estuary, about 160 kilometres north of the mouth of the River Tyne. So just beyond or on the edge of it at different times of Roman Britain itself. Fieldwork by the University of Aberdeen on a coastal sea stack site. And those of you who know my terrible fear of heights will not be surprised to learn that I didn't visit the excavation. It's been excavated by the University of Aberdeen and also in the 19th century. And from the earlier excavations, many years apart, we have large parts of including a carefully cut off neck of a South Spanish Dressel 20 amphora. The rim and the neck is from an amphora of about 110, 150 AD in the Augs typology. The more recent material is a single 56.4 gram recognisable bodysherd from the lower part of a South Gaulish amphora. Not enough to say which Gaul was for, but assuming it must be a Gaul was for. The Dressel 20 amphora from the site may have been fractured during intended reworking into a tub-like vessel and then discarded, where they were chopping off the rim and the handles to make a tub. Now the modification and reuse of such amphoras in the Roman north is under-synthesised, not least because few vessels as were preserved as the one from the site, the Gegan, other than those which are used in Roman military sites as sunken toilets. Dressel 20s converted into tubs are not unknown in the northwestern provinces, as are neatly finished decapitations, so you know the two halves of the one operation. An empty, But interestingly, this site, the coastal site, the Gegan, has briquetage, the salt-making ceramic, and in a relatively recent discussion of just such material in Cornwall, Elaine Morris drew attention to the possible reuse of Dressel 20 amphoras as transport containers, in this case to bring up the brine from sea level to the cliff top to do the salt making, and it's quite possible that was what was going to happen with the Dressel 20 amphora from the Gegan. So that's its second life. The first life of the South Gaulish amphora is to do with wine drinking. Leaving aside the interesting question of how this thing was exported, by which river or sea route, stroke land route, from the south of France to southern Scotland, and making the assumption, which is not unproblematic in Scottish terms, that we can go from a surviving sherd to the original vessel. I'm going to use, as the post-excavation goes on, this recent find to discuss the consumption of imported wine as the common ground in which pottery studies ought to engage with the rather more advanced recent glass studies research by a man called Dominic Ingemark, published in a book called Wine and Power, Alcohol and Power in Iron Age Scotland. Now his aims, after the detailed analysis of as many finds of Roman glass as possible, centred around issues of the use and redeployment of glass vessels for drinking and the impact of Roman wine drinking customs amongst Roman Iron Age society. Pottery drinking vessels, especially jugs and flagons for servings, small bowls for serving and drinking, beakers and cups for drinking, and bottles like the Gaul was for transport and storing, scored very highly amongst the functional categories that Ingemark had sorted the Roman Iron Age glass into. And he argues that this Roman glass, wine serving, individual drinking and storing vessels, comprise a quite narrow range compared with the glass from Romano-British sites generally. And he says it thinks it's represented what he calls a deliberate choice of goods of particular meaning and value in native society. He views Roman Iron Age elites in this part of the edge of Roman Britain not as passive receivers of an essentially random selection of foreign exotics, but rather the opposite. Agency again, as a dynamic and discerning clientele choosing objects of a particular political usefulness. So comparative pottery research using the single sherd from the Gegan as a way in is lagging behind, and it's an indication of how conditional our knowledge is that one sherd can change everything. You know, I could have stood here a couple of years ago and said there are no Roman wine amphoras in Iron Age Scotland, and now there's one from one sherd. But really, we ought to take the take the opportunity to link the growing volume of evidence for pottery containers of mixing and pouring wine. There are a decent number, especially at Traprain Law, as Louisa Campbell showed, of flagons. Into discussion that is so far dominated by the glass vessels, the metal drinking pans, and even samian bowls, so that going forward into post-excavation, any apparent cultural gap between the indigenous and the Roman military communities, which are far better known in this part of my part of Roman Britain, is slowly being at least nuanced, but we are far yet from a replacement paradigm, for example, one suggested by any network analysis of exchange. Thank you.